Hello, hi, this is Aditya and welcome to Shankar MarTech channel. Today I am going to introduce you to a topic called Sling Models. Initially, I'll explain the foundational concepts like Java concepts like MVC pattern, adapter pattern and all those things, which are like foundation concepts to understand the Sling models. And then I'll move on to Sling models and then I'll take some example code and I'll explain you each and every line of that code. Hope you will enjoy this video. This video is part of the AEM tutorials playlist for beginners. If you are interested, please check out the link in the description box. And please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Let's get started with the presentation. Okay, so let's first try to review the content rendering flow. Okay, so what I have done is in this path I have created one test page. Okay, and I have just opened this test page. So as of now there is no component added to this particular page, but now I can click on this plus icon and I can add a component to it. Let us suppose I am adding a button component here. Okay, now the button component gets added here, right? And then I can just open this button component and I can just enter some text here. Maybe I'll enter learn more. And I can also give some link here. Okay, I can link it to maybe some path. Okay, maybe I'll link it to this path. And then I'll click on done. Okay, so now whatever text I have entered in the dialog box, that text came here. So if I just refresh this page, let's see what happens. So I have refreshed this page and if you see here, this learn more, whatever text I have entered is still there, which means that the text which I have entered is persistent. Okay, so it is being saved somewhere in the database, right? So first we need to understand where exactly it is being saved. So if you want to visualize the end-to-end content rendering flow, it would look something like this. Okay, so here is the dialog box. Okay, so we'll give the ability for authors to open this dialog box and author will enter the button text and link here and he will click on OK. Once he clicks on OK, the data which he has entered has to get saved in a particular database. Okay, so then once we refresh, what needs to happen is the page, it should somehow know where exactly this particular component has stored the data and it has to get the data which the author has stored. For example, this learn more, this text, right, it has been saved somewhere. Okay, so that data it has to retrieve it and it has to present it as a button here on the browser. Okay, so there are two flows here. One flow is the input flow wherein author will open the dialog box and save it to the database, and another thing is the output flow or presentation flow wherein we get the data from the database and present it onto the browser. Okay, so we need to understand how these two flows are working in AEM first. Okay, so let's try to understand that. Okay, so if I go back to this particular page and if I just go into the developer mode again, so if I just go into the developer mode, so here it will show all the components which I've added, and if I just select on this particular component and it will open this button component here. Okay, so now if I just click on this one, view details, it will save me where exactly this button is being stored. Okay, so there is a page. Okay, this is the page path. This is still test page, right? This is the page path, and on this page I have added the component, and whatever properties which I'm giving in the dialog box, right? Whatever values which I'm giving in the dialog box, it is part of this particular component. So maybe those details are being saved in the same path where the component is also there. Okay, so where is the component? So just let's copy this path. Okay, and just go to CRXDE and just paste this path and click on enter. Now if you see what is our path here, see it is content weekend language masters event and test page, right? So if you come back here, it will go into the same path. Okay, content weekend language master event test page, and if you see in this there will be something called as JCR content. Okay, under EN, there is a test page. Okay, under test page there is JCR content, and under this JCR content in the container there is a button. Okay, here is where our button component is being stored. Okay, so now if you see these properties here, right? So we can find two properties. One is JCR title, and the value of it is learn more. And you have another property which is link, and you see the path which we selected here. Okay, so this is where the data is getting stored. Okay, so now if you observe these property names, where exactly these names came from. Okay, so to understand that, we need to see the button code. Okay, so to see the button code, all you need to do is, again, you have to come here, just click on the back. And if you go back to this button, and if you have click on this pencil icon, it will see edit script. So if you just click on this, it will edit the corresponding script for that. Okay, so this is the script which it is executing. Okay, so here if we open the dialog box here, so this is the dialog box. If I just open all this dialog box, so inside the properties, okay, so I'll open all the properties which I have. So these are all the properties which I have. If I just select this test property, you see the name here. So the name of it is /JCR title. And if you see the name of this link, right, it is /link. Okay, so the name which you have given here, the same name is coming over here. Okay, in the content path, when it is saving this name, how is it knowing that it has to take the same name? It is the same name as the dialog box name. Okay, so whatever name you have given for this property, with the same name, it will store it in here. Okay, so that's first thing which we need to understand. So now if we see the same content flow here, how is the dialog box being rendered? So this we have already seen in our previous video, right? So it comes to this dialog, it will see the Sling property, and then this is the out of the box resource type. It knows that it has to open this particular dialog box, right? And then we inside that we added the container and then all these properties. So all these things we have discussed in our previous video, so I'm not repeating myself here. So if we come here into the text, here also we have a Sling resource type, and the Sling resource type says that it is the text field. So that's how this text field is being appeared. So this is how, by creating the dialog box properties here, we created the input. Okay, so now this part is done, right? So once you click on done, it is the out of the box Adobe functionality or AEM functionality to save whatever you have entered into this repository and here in this path. So it will create two more properties for this button component, and it will save them whatever values you have entered. Okay, so to test that, we just change this button name to learn more and click on done. So here it got changed, learn more. And now if you come back and if you just refresh this component, here too that value got reflected. Okay, so this is how it is being saved. So now till now this is clear. So now what we need to understand is the second flow. Okay, so now once we refresh the page, somehow while the page is being loaded, so here you click on the refresh, and while the page is being loaded, the Sling framework goes to the database. It gets the content of that particular button, and then it passes on to the presentation layer, and then presentation layer will present it as a button to the browser. Okay, so we have three layers here. One is the database and business logic layer, wherein it has to get the values from the database, and then those values it has to pass on to the presentation layer, and then the presentation layer will present it to the client as a button. Okay, so this is the general web architecture. Any web application architecture will have three layers. Okay, one is database layer, business logic layer, presentation layer. Okay, so now we need to understand how this is being implemented in AEM. So now to understand that, we need to understand something called as MVC pattern. Okay, so MVC pattern is nothing but a view, model and controller pattern. Okay, so this is the pattern which is being implemented in AEM2. Okay, so let's try to understand how exactly this pattern works. Okay, so this is the browser. Okay, so then you will enter some URL in the browser, and then the first thing which happens is the request comes onto the controller. Okay, so the controller is a piece of Java code. Okay, so this is a piece of Java code. So its job is to monitor and control the entire flow. Okay, so that is its job. So first the request came here. Then what it does is it will identify which model to execute. Okay, so what is this model? Okay, so the model is where the business logic is there. And what this business logic will do is it will connect to the database, it will get all the details, and it will store all those details in the variables. Okay, so maybe you have to, if it is an SQL database, right, you will have to execute some query. So the structure of the data which is there in the database is completely different than how you should store it in the Java code, right? So what it does is it executes that query, gets that data from the database, and it will transform the data and store it in a friendly manner, which the controller or presentation layer can use. Okay, so that's the job of this model. Okay, get the data and store it in the variables. Okay, so then this model is also a piece of Java code. Okay, and then what happens is it will get all those data into the variables, and it will pass on the data to the controller. So now what controller does is whatever data it is getting from the model, it will just pass it on to the view. And what is this view? This is also a piece of Java code. So the job of this particular Java code is to render that particular data, whatever it is getting from the controller, in a particular way. Okay, so for example, if we have some list of elements, okay, if we have an unordered list which has to be displayed in a bulleted format, right, in the bullet points. Okay, so let us suppose all those bullet points are saved in the database. Okay, so now you got the request and you will have to render all those bullet points which are saved in the database. So first the request comes to the controller. Then it will send the request to the model. Okay, so then model will query the database and get all the bulleted points. Now, what are those bulleted points? These bulleted points it will store in the model, let us suppose as an array. Okay, as an array of strings or something. Okay, so all those bulleted points are stored as an array. Then it will pass on that array to the controller. Then controller will pass that array to the view. Then view will iterate over those arrays and generate the HTML code, which will render it as a list of items, list of unordered items in the form of the bulleted points. Okay, so why should we do all this exercise? So any design pattern, right, it is just a best practice for the coding. So we have to maintain the separation of concerns. Okay, so if the code is divided like this, then one person can work, let us suppose, on this model design, and one person can work on this controller design, and other person can work on this view. So three developer can work parallelly. But if all this code is in one file, then one person only has to work. So how can we divide the code so that multiple people can work on it and achieve the results in a faster way? So that is what the design patterns are solving. Okay, what is the best way to write a particular code? So this is one of the recommended way that you need to write a code like this, the MVC design pattern. Okay, so AEM follows this MVC design pattern. So let us see how does it follow now. So this is the way MVC design pattern works in AEM. Okay, this is the browser and you enter some URL, and first the request will hit the controller. Here the controller is Sling framework itself. Sling framework controls everything. Okay, so then Sling framework will identify what is the model it has to execute. Okay, so it will send the request to the Sling model. Okay, so this is the Sling model which we are talking about. So Sling model is nothing but a model in this MVC design pattern. It is called a Sling model because it is a model in MVC pattern. Okay, so now the job of this model is to get the data from the database and store it into the variables. Okay, so then this model information again will be passed on to the controller, and then controller will pass this information to view, and view in our case is HTL or slightly. Okay, so this is the code which we write in our AEM HTML pages. Okay, HTL is HTML templating language. Okay, which in AEM's case is Slightly. Okay, so using this templating language, we will loop through or iterate through or use the variables which are passed on by the model, and we will render it here. Okay, so how exactly we'll do it? We'll see one code as an example, and then we'll try to understand it now. This is a sample and simple and basic model. Okay, so this is a model to implement the button functionality. Like if it is not out of the box and if we have to implement our own button functionality, how do we do it? So that is what is this simple code, and this is a Sling model. Okay, this is how it will look like. And if you see this code, this is the HTL code or Slightly code. This is how it will look like. So here we are using a keyword called data slide use, okay, which indicates that we are trying to use this particular Java code or Sling model, okay, and then whatever variables are there as part of this Java code, we are trying to use it as part of this HTML code, and the way we use it is like this. Okay, so as I told, this is the view. If you go back to our example, we have the view, right? So this is our view. So its job is to take the variables from the model and has to render it in the UI, right? So how it will take those variables? So for that, taking those variables from model, it has to somehow accept those variables from the model, right? The way in which it does is using this templating language. Okay, so this is how you give the syntax. So that you are saying, I am trying to use this particular code. Okay, this is my model, and it will create an instance of this particular class and store it in this model variable. Okay, so this is the variable name. This is the syntax to define the variable. Okay, so it has stored this particular object in this variable. Now you can use this variable to access its properties. So link is one of its variable model. This class's variable, and also title is another variable in this particular class. Okay, so whatever values this link and title has, you are able to access it in a Slightly code. Okay, so this is the basic syntax of the Slightly, very simple syntax of the Slightly. Okay, so now let's try to understand here what is this code. Okay, and how do we define and write the Sling model. Okay, so first thing we need to do is the package. Okay, so this is the package. Package in Java is nothing but the folder structure as to where exactly this particular code is being saved. Okay, you can imagine this as com slash adobe slash aem slash, like that. There will be folders created, and in those folders there will be this button class present. Okay, and this path is important because this is how you will reference it in the Slightly code. If you see here, you have given the entire package name dot class name. Okay, so this is the unique way in which the class can be identified. Okay, and it will create this instance of this class and it will assign it to this model variable. Okay, so that's what will happen once the Slightly framework see this code. That is what it will do. Okay, so now coming back to this code, these are all the import statements. So whatever classes which you are using, for example, this resource class, that has to be imported first. Otherwise, it doesn't know what is this resource class. Okay, so what is this resource class? For it to understand, you will have to import the corresponding code before. So these are all import statements. Okay, so now if you see here, there is something called as @model. So what is this called? This is called as annotation. By using these annotations, you are communicating something to the compiler. Okay, what you're communicating here is you're saying that this whatever code I am writing here, this is nothing but a model. What do we mean by model? As I already explained here, right? This is the model. Somehow the Sling framework should know what are all the available models are there, right? So how do you declare that? So this is the way you declare to the Sling framework or your controller that this is one of the model. Okay, and then you are passing something here called as adaptables. So to understand what is this adaptables, you need to have a basic idea as to what is the adapter pattern. Adapter pattern is one of the design pattern. Okay, so if we just go to here, right, what is this design pattern, adapter design pattern? Let us suppose you are a resident of India and suddenly you went to USA. Okay, so in India you have the laptop socket, something like this, right? It is the Indian socket. Okay, now you go to the USA and your plug will change. It will not be same as your Indian plugs here, right? And the voltage also differs. Okay, so in USA you have different voltage, and India you have different voltage. Now you'll have to adapt the same charger, same your laptop charger to the USA plugs. So how do you do it? You use something called as adapter. Okay, so you just plug your plug into this adapter, and you will plug this adapter to this socket, so that whatever electric input you are getting into this socket will be changed or adapted to the needs of this particular plug. Okay, so that is what is the job of the adapter, and same applies to the Java code too. So how exactly this particular adapter functionality is implemented in AEM? So to understand that, we need to see what are all the list of adaptables which are there. Okay, so if we just go to the system console, and if you go to the Sling, and if you see the Sling adapters, right? So these are all the list of adapters which are there in AEM. Okay, so in the first class, what you see is adaptable. So adaptable is nothing but this input. Okay, so this has to be adapted to something else, right? Now, you have the input electricity here. You are getting some voltage like 110 voltage here. Now you have to adapt this voltage into something else. So this is called as adaptable. Okay, so this is what you are wanting to adapt to something else. So this is the adaptable. Like that, you see the first column here, right? So these are all the classes which can be adapted to something else. These are called as adaptable classes, which can be adapted to something else. Okay, so what is that something else? That is given here. This is adapter class. Okay, so this is like this one. Okay, so this is being adapted to this, right? Similarly, see here, this first column class can be adapted to this second column class. Okay, so now here if you scroll down here, so you can see something called as a resource class, right? So this resource is one of the class. And what is this? This first column is adaptable, right? So this is your adaptable class, which can be adapted to any one of these classes in the right side. Okay, so what does this adapting mean? It will just take this resource as the input, and it will transform the variables and everything in this resource class into this particular class, whatever you have told here. Okay, so now what you are saying here is in your code, this is my model, and what is the input I am taking as adaptable is this resource class. Okay, so what is this resource you are getting here? That we need to understand now. Okay, so to understand that, we need to understand from where exactly this code is being called. Right, so this code is being called from this slightly code. Right, in this slightly code, you have this call to that particular class. Right, from here that particular class is being called and everything is getting created, and all this functionality is being executed. Right, now where is this code? This code is part of our button functionality. So button.html. So the whatever code we have written here, this code is part of this button.html, which is part of this button component. Okay, so now how the entire flow works is, you will try to load this page. Okay, now in this page, first it will go to this particular page in CRXD. Sling framework will enter into this test.page, right? And it will see what all components are there as part of this particular page. Okay, so now if you see what all components are there, you have the button component, right? Now it will go to this button component and it will see what is the Sling resource type. Then you will find the location of the source code of that particular component. So then it will come on to this source code and it will try to execute this source code. And in that particular source code, you have this reference to this particular model. Then it comes to this particular model, right? And now you have this resource here. So now what is this resource? This resource is nothing but this component here. Okay, so everything in Sling is resource. So this is resource, this is resource, this is resource, this is resource. Everything is a resource. But when you say adaptable resource here, what is the reference it is getting here? Which data, which value it is receiving here? The value which this is receiving is this particular button. Why? Because this model is being called from this particular button's code. So whatever resource you are seeing here as part of this particular page, right? Whatever button component which you are seeing here, the entire reference of this particular button component will be passed on to this particular model. Okay, so that is what is happening here. Okay, so then after that, what you say is default injection strategy. What is this default injection strategy? We'll come on to this later. Okay, but first let's try to understand what is this @inject annotation. Okay, so by writing this @inject annotation, we are saying to the Sling framework that some value has to be injected here. Okay, so what do we mean by injection? Okay, so we need to understand another pattern called as dependency injection here. Okay, in general, if you want to set some value, for example, to this variable, the way you set it is you give equal to here and you say this is title. This is the way we set some value to a variable, right? But here you are not doing any of this. Okay, we are not doing any of this, and we are only getting this title. We are not setting it anywhere. Then who is setting the value for this title? The Sling framework is doing it. And how does it know that it has to inject some value here? Because you have this annotation @inject. But what is the actual value it is trying to inject here? Okay, so now what it does is it takes the input as this resource, right? And what is this resource? This resource is nothing but whatever this button component is there, that is being passed as a resource. Okay, so then what it does is this resource is an adaptable, right? It adapts this resource to a value map. Okay, so now what is this value map? Okay, so now if we go back to this one, right? And if I search for value map here, okay, so now this is the resource which is adaptable, and it says that this resource adaptable class can be adapted to this value map. So this is the value map. Okay, so now to understand any class, what you need to do is you need to copy this entire path and you just need to Google it out. Then you will get the description of what is that value map. Okay, so if we just go into this particular class, here you will understand what is this value map. Okay, so if you read through this, what it says is whatever data you have as part of these properties, right? What is this data? It is nothing but there is some name and there is some value. Name, value, right? All these name values can be stored as a value map. Now you have this resource. From that resource, you got this value map. Okay, so this is called as adapting to. Okay, you have the resource, and somehow from this resource you need to get these properties. So you just say this resource dot adapt to value map, then it will get all these values into a value map. Okay, so that is nothing but it's just transforming the data. So you can access this properties also by saying resource dot get properties, and then what it will return is a value map. But instead of you writing resource dot get properties, what you are saying is resource dot adapt to value map. Okay, so now what it ultimately does is this is your adaptable. It is converting or it is getting the properties of this resource. Okay, and what are those properties? These are those properties. Okay, so now after getting those properties, it sees this inject @inject annotation, and what it does is it will see this variable name. It is title, right? And then it will try to search for that particular variable name in these names. So here you have the title. So then it will try to get this value, learn more, and it will try to inject this value into this particular variable. And here also you see another inject annotation, and it will see what is the variable name. It is link. So it will try to find that particular property name in this particular resource. Okay, and it will try to find that name link. It will see what is the value, and it will take this value and inject that value into here. Inject is nothing but it will just assign this value like this.
So without you having to write one line of code, it will just copy this and it will paste it here, and it will paste it here. So this is what it will do. Okay, so otherwise if you will have to connect to the JCR, you will have to write everything, right? You will have to write how to connect to this particular database, how to go to this particular property, how to get this value, or every code you will have to write. But just by putting this inject, you need not write anything. It will just get that value. It means this Sling framework is getting that particular value from that particular resource, and it is just injecting that into this one. This is called as dependency injection. It will reduce your effort to write the code. Everything Sling framework will do. All you need to do is just put an @inject annotation here. Okay, so now coming back to this particular code, default injection strategy optional. So what does this mean? By default, whenever you say @inject, right, Sling framework will assume that this is a required field. Okay, so that is by default, every injected variable should be required. So that is the assumption which Sling framework is making. To change that assumption, you are saying my default strategy is optional. Okay, so let us suppose you have 10 variables here, right? Instead of 2, you have 10 variables. In that, maybe 1 is required and rest all others are optional, or maybe everything is optional. Okay, so then by default, Sling assumes that everything is required. Okay, so then what you need to do is you need to go to each and every variable and you need to put optional annotation also here. Only then it understands that this is optional. Otherwise, it thinks that this is required field. And if it is not, and if there is no variable value here, it will error out, saying that I am expecting some required value here, but you are not giving it, so I am erroring out. So that's how it will error out. So to avoid that, and to avoid this repetition of this optional for every variable, right, you will say my default injection strategy is optional. So instead of considering everything as required, every injected variable as required, you consider every injected variable as optional. So if there is only one variable which is required, I'll put just required annotation only to that particular variable, so that you know that it is required. Because I have 9 other variables which are optional, so I need not put optional onto all those 9 variables. So what is your default injection strategy? Is it optional or is it required? That is what you're saying here. And ultimately, you have something called as post construct annotation. So once this particular resource has been adapted to the value map and all these variables are being loaded, then this init function will get called. If you have to do some extra coding here, you can do it. Or you can just remove this entire thing also. It will just inject those values and leave it. Okay, so then what you are doing here is you are getting those values. Okay, so this is a plain old Java object. So Sling model is nothing but a POJO. POJO is plain old Java object wherein you have certain setters. This is how you are setting it, and you have certain getters. This is how you will get the values, and this is a private variable. Okay, so this is how you are getting the value. So this getter value is what you are calling here. Okay, so ideally, if you have to call a particular method, for example, this method from another Java code, what you need to do, you need to use that object name, and you need to give this method name, right? Get title like this. But you cannot give the method name like this in Sling. What you need to do is you need to remove this particular part called get. Okay, you need to remove this, and then you need to put this title as small. Okay, and you need to remove these parentheses also, and this is how you will access this particular method. The name here is title, but here the method is get title. You might think that when you say the title, it is directly accessing maybe this title, this variable. No, it cannot access it because this is a private variable. Okay, any private variable can be accessed only in that particular class. You cannot directly access this variable name outside that particular class, because that is a private variable. Okay, so the way you need to access it is using these getter methods. Okay, but this get title, it is not the same name what you use here. Okay, any getter has to start with get. This is the syntax you must follow. Okay, if you have any other variables, okay, so if you change it to get titles, let us suppose, Okay, then you will have to change this variable to titles here, because the way it works is it will just, you have to first copy paste this method name and you have to put it here, and you need to remove this get, and you have to put this ts small, and you need to remove this parenthesis. Then it becomes titles, and only when you say titles it accesses that method. If you by mistake say here title, then it will throw the error. Okay, because it doesn't find the method title. Okay, so when it says title, when you say title, it will automatically put get here, it will convert this to t, and it will put this parenthesis here, and then for this method it will search. Okay, so this is the syntax you will have to follow in Slightly. So that is how you are getting the title, and then you, to get the link here, you will have to say link. Okay, then you will be able to access that particular link using this method model.link. So it means that you are accessing get link method. Okay, so that is how you are getting, and this method will return the actual value. This is the title value, this is the private value, right? That private value this method will access and it will return. And since this method is public method, you can access this particular public method outside that particular class too. Okay, so that's how the title which is being injected by the framework, it will get returned. Okay, so now to see the entire flow, you come onto this page, you have opened this dialog box, right, and you entered all these details. Okay, and you clicked on done, then it saved that value into database. Now when you are refreshing this particular page, the first thing it does is the control will go to the Sling framework, and Sling framework will try to find this particular page in CRSD. Okay, it will find the page and it will see whatever components are there as part of this particular page. So it will see this particular resource and it will go to that particular resource code, and in that code you have accessed this particular model. So then it will go to that particular model and you say here adaptable resource, right? So it passes on this particular resource. So which resource you have here in the content, right? In this page you have this button. So this button resource, it will pass it on to this particular model. Okay, so now it got that. Then you say here inject. So then first it will convert this resource into the value map, which means that it will try to get the properties of that particular resource. Then it sees the inject variable here. So it will find that for this particular title variable in this properties, and it will try to access that particular value and it will inject into this particular title. Okay, so then it has injected all these variable values, then it will pass it on to this particular view, which is again our Slightly code. So all that values which are being injected here are there as part of this particular variable. So now you can access that particular variable values using the method, and the way you need to access this particular method is not by using the method name, but you need to actually remove this get, put small here and remove this parenthesis, and by this you access this classes, this method, and this method is returning the value link, right? This method is returning the value link, and that's how this link will get sent here, and this button is being rendered here. This is the entire flow. Hope you have understood how the Sling model works. We'll see more examples on the Sling model and try to understand in detail. If you are liking the videos which I am doing, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you.